I'm Mariefiebach of feedyourfamilytonight.com, and today I have a fun little recipe that you can make for Christmas morning. You can make it ahead the day before, and it's just kind of a fun little sweet bread that you can have while you're opening gifts on Christmas morning. It is an almond poppy seed bread, and this is a classic recipe that my mother made growing up. It has this yummy, crunchy topping, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the first thing you want to do is prepare your pan. This is just a standard loaf pan, and I like to spray it with cooking spray. And then I'm going to line it with a piece of parchment paper that I cut. It's going to kind of come up the edges a little bit. So you're going to put it into your pan, and then you're going to spray again. And this is going to keep the poppy seed bread from sticking. We're going to start with the wet ingredients. I have 3/4 of a cup of oil, and this is just plain vegetable oil. I have done this with avocado oil as well. Don't recommend using olive oil because it'll give some off flavors to this. And then 1 cup of milk. And if you want to make this dairy free, I have used unsweetened almond milk and it works really, really well. So 3/4 of a cup of oil, 1 cup of milk, 2 eggs, and then to the ingredients, we're going to add 3 flavorings. I have a teaspoon of Imitation butter flavoring. When my daughter was eating this the other night, she said, "What makes this cake taste so delicious?" And it is Imitation butter flavoring. You get it in the grocery store, just kind of like by the vanilla and the almond extract, which are the next 2 ingredients. We're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla, and the recipe for this is at feedyourfamilytonight.com if you want to make your own vanilla. And then I also put in a teaspoon of almond extract. Once you have all of these wet ingredients in, you're going to stir it up and add 1 1/4 cups of sugar, just plain granulated sugar. So I'm going to mix this together, make sure that those egg yolks get incorporated, and then we're going to add the dry ingredients. This uses 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I measure this by the dip and swipe method. You want to make sure that you've got about 12 to 12.5 ounces of flour. If you have it really fluffy and you spoon the flour in, you're going to want a little bit more, otherwise your cake batter is going to be too thin. And then I have 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and I just sprinkle that over the flour so you don't get a big clump in the middle of your batter, and 1 teaspoon of table salt. And then poppy seed bread needs to have poppy seeds, so a tablespoon of poppy seeds. I'm just going to mix this until most of the flour is incorporated. If you still have a few little lumps, that's okay. It's kind of like pancake batter where a few lumps are okay. So I'm going to stir this really well, and I'm going to pour it into my loaf pan. This is going to bake at 350 degrees for about 55 to 65 minutes. You know it's done when you insert a toothpick in the center and it comes out with just like 1 or 2 little moist crumbs. If it has batter that looks raw when you take it out, let it go for another 5 or 10 minutes in the oven. I'm going to pour this into my pan, and then I'm going to talk with you about the glaze, which is really what makes this cake, bread. It's probably more of a cake if I'm honest, but it's in a loaf pan, so we'll call it bread. But the glaze is what's going to make this taste delicious. When you take the bread out of the oven, you're going to let it cool for about 5 minutes, and then you're going to leave it in the pan, and you're going to pour this glaze on it. The glaze starts with 6 tablespoons of granulated sugar, 1 tablespoon of orange juice, and I honestly just squeezed that orange juice from an orange I had in the refrigerator, but you could use any kind of orange juice that you have, a tablespoon of water, and then we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of those 3 flavorings we did earlier. So I have a 1/4 teaspoon of that vanilla and a 1/4 teaspoon of that magic butter flavoring, and then we're going to add the final 1/4 teaspoon, which is almond extract. The sugar, when you stir this up, is not going to totally dissolve, and that's kind of what makes this topping so good, because it gets kind of crunchy on the top of this almond bread. So your bread has baked, you've taken it out of the oven and let it cool, and then you're just going to pour this glaze over the top, and you're going to let the bread completely cool. Then you're going to run a knife around the sides of the pan and lift it out and slice it. And you end up with this almond poppy seed bread that has this crunchy, sugary topping on the top. The full recipe is at feedyourfamilytonight.com. And if you have any questions, join me in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group. I'm always happy to meet you there.